Hi everyone, in this video I'll be painting and kitbashing a Krondispine. So I'm not really happy with this model. I think it's fine. It's a floating skeleton, but I want to use it in my Nighthaunt army. And I have this model at home, the Mourngul, and I can't use it anymore because it's Legends in the current AOS system. So my whole plan was to have him or her or it, whatever it is, in my army as like kind of a because it used to have like really good rules. Like it'd be like a missile, wouldn't it? It'd have like many attacks and it'll just tear units up. So I was a bit bummed out that I couldn't use it. So I thought, hey, I'm gonna kitbash it, but then I'll use it as a Krondispine, as like a manifestation that one of my characters can summon in. So in a way I still can use the Mourngul, but it's under a different name and has different rules. So I got an extra base, which is actually the same size as the giant bases, the Gargant bases, 130 mm. And then I'm just using my usual clay now, just to make some texture on the ground. I'm making up as I go along. I've got some idea, like I want to add like a fence, like from the Mausoleum kits that I showed earlier. I'm also using these rolling pins from Green Stuff World, and I've just wet it with some water now, and then I'm just rolling it all over and just experimenting. So at this stage of kitbashing, I have an idea. I'm not sure if you guys are the same. Do you draw it? Do you write it down? But for me, I have it in my head, and then I just like to trial and error, cut things up, roll things around, and if it looks great, great. If it doesn't, then I'll work at it, or add more random bits to it, and then have a break and then come back to it a day or two later. So this is the base now. I've let it dry a little bit, like it's a bit soft now. So what I'm using a nice sharp knife. Sharp is very important because it just slides through it. It's quite a therapeutic experience, to be honest. And I'm just checking it's all smooth now, and then there's some gaps, so I'll just smooth that as well, and then it'll fill in the gaps too. And I'll just repeat this process around the whole rim. As you can see here, it's not fully covered, and that's on purpose because I want to have, my original idea was to add some water effects or some type of effect to fill in the gap there, but as time goes on I don't use water effects, and I'll just add dirt or rocks, just add a bit of variety to the base. So I got tons of these, and I love using them for my characters, for my soul blights, my Feshit courts, and now my ghosts, my Nighthaunts. So the problem with this terrain, it's very long and it's awkward, so you've got to cut it a bit, and if you don't mind doing that, you can really use it for some great effects. So I'm just dry fitting everything now. I'm trying to look at the spacing. Like I don't want it to be too far back, but then I also don't want it to be too cluttered as well. So I'm just dry fitting, moving it around, seeing what works, maybe trying different angles, maybe having less, maybe having more. So that's, I'm kind of liking this, but it just feels like it's boxed in, like a child, like a baby in those little play areas. So that feels a bit weird. So what I've done now, I've just used 3 parts, which they're basically like the same kit, but they've just been cut off, and I'm moving them around. And don't worry about the gaps, because that can be filled in with some putty later, or leave the gaps there like it's been destroyed, it's old. So now I'll put this filler on the base, and then I use a knife just to I trace the base, but I press it a little bit hard. And what I do, I just go around and then I just pop it out. And actually I could use this for a base later on for another character. It should be 80 mm, I think. Should be 80 mm base. It's pretty big. So the actual base is not 3D printed. I bought it from a third party resin base seller, maybe Ski Ball or some other Dragon Forge. I'm not too sure. Could be Dragon Forge actually. So now what I do, I just start putting in all those pieces. And it's not glued in, it's not stuck yet. But when I'm happy with it, then I'll start pushing in deeper. This is actually from a Stormcast character. Should be the Lord Veritans. That's his name. This is a 3D printed rubble I got online. I'll try and find the link and then I'll put it in my bio in the description, just in case you're curious. It's a really useful one actually. Like, this is downscaled, these should be like arches. But I think it works pretty well as like, you know, a destroyed mini wall or something. So that's basically it. This is how it looks. And now what I'm doing, I'm using, it's probably not the most conventional thing, but I'm using putty, the Vallejo putty, to fill in all the gaps. But I'm also actually making it into like mounds of dirt. So I'm really adding quite a lot. And I'm using my brush just to wipe it in and smooth it out. And I'm also doing it around the edge of the bases, just to fill in some areas that had some gaps. Because when the clay dries, it kind of bends and it goes upwards, so you have to be careful of that. And I'm just pulling it around these things, and I also felt like it solidifies them a bit more as well. Once it dries, it makes them a bit more snug. I've also added some PVA as well, just to make them extra strong. PVA works really well for this, so don't use super glue or anything like that. Now I'm using some kind of crackling paints or texture paint, up to you to be honest, but I wanted to add some crackling type paint because I want to add some interesting texture of like dirt or rocks. And what I'm doing now, I'm actually focusing on areas that I've glued on, like for example the rocks, the base, the round base in the middle, and the fence, because I just want to tidy that in because they seem a bit like they've just been placed there. So I've painted it black, very simple, no Zenithal this time, and now I'm using this Lubrical green paint as the base color. It's an air paint, this one, so it's very thin. You can see right here, it doesn't cover that well, so I needed a few coats. You could use the non-air one, but I don't have that one. That should be thicker, but still, it's always best to build it up in a gradual way. Maybe not only 2 thin coats, maybe 3 thin coats with this stuff. Now I use the Fang. I haven't used this blue for a long time, but I just thought it's perfect for my Nighthaunt scheme, which is like blue bases, and then the model itself would have like, bright white or popping reds. So I wanted to have a contrast between a cold blue, and so in my other videos I use decomposed flesh. I really love it, but I always have this one called vampire flesh. It's slightly different, but I thought I'd try it out today just to try something new. And yeah, it is very different actually to decomposed flesh. It's a bit paler, I would say. It's quite nice, but if you don't have it, you can use decomposed flesh. That's just as fine, to be honest. Or even Iron Rack skin from Citadel. They're very similar colors, to be honest. Iron Rack, I guess, is a little bit darker than this, just by a bit though, but that doesn't matter, to be honest. This is just basically the first dry brush. That's the first of many, should we say. And I'm using a cheap brush, so it's just from a model shop. And I've noticed with this brush, like the bristles are coming out, they're falling out as I'm doing it, so you can't really see it on the camera, but the black mat is like full of like dust or bits of bristles. It's very messy, but it's doing the job, I guess. I also use the same paint on the terrain as well, but as I was doing it, I felt like it's a bit too samey as the skin, so I decided not to heavily dry brush the ground, and maybe I just focus on the rocky areas and some parts of the base, because I was very worried, you know, it would just look the same with some minor blues and greens. But later on I'll be adding more shades and contrasts and so on, so it's not a big deal. So now I use Poxwalker. It's like a shade. I put it on thick first, as you can see in the middle of the back. Then I will get water on my brush, and I'll just start spreading it around now. And I'll move my brush into where the crevices are of like the muscles, the ribs, the shoulders. And if you see on the arm, there's that darker area going along the arm. I also try and push it and keep it there, like now. It just helps glazing in, and it gives like kind of a mid-tone between the green and also the dry brushed vampire flesh. But don't worry, this isn't it. There's so much more to do, and we're gonna make it nice and bright and pop in later on. So I use the shade now to go over the base. I put it in thick, but then I thin it with water, and then I just spread it all around. So it's kind of like a dark blue kind of color to it, and I was thinking to choose like non-oil or some kind of black, but that might darken it down too much. And then I thought I'd use it on the rocks as well and the stone areas, just to tie it all in as well. I like to paint the rim earlier, even though I probably need to repaint it later. So iron rack skin now. Oh, so before I mentioned you can use iron rack skin for the dry brush instead of vampire skin. That's basically what's happening now. I'm not using the vampire skin, so I'm just going to use some iron rack skin to dry brush over that shade I've just added. So there's a bit of back and forth going on in this video in terms of, you know, the colors and areas that are going to be highlighted or focused on. I've kind of noticed with these models, the old resin models from Forge World, they're very porous. They've got many tiny holes in them, and especially when you dry brush, it really picks out all those holes that are in maybe they're air bubbles, or maybe it's just the texture, or at the time they just didn't, you know how to print very smooth areas. But I've found that a lot with the old resin stuff. Like I painted some demons and they have similar skin, and when I'm dry brushing them, they have a very chalky look. Well, chalk is a bit normal with dry brushing, if you had too much paint especially, or certain types of paints. But I don't know, compared to plastic, there's a lot more texture on them when you dry brush, which I don't always like, to be honest, but it requires a bit of thinning and painting some mid-tones and glazes to sort that out. Yeah, I made sure to put my hand here when dry brushing. It just kept it secure, otherwise it will like flip around because it's basically hanging on his arm. Thin down some of the iron rack, like quite a lot, and then I just paint it over the model. this is going to act as like to tone down the green areas that you can still see. It's super thin. It won't really make a difference on the majority, but there's certain areas that I might have missed dry brushing or I couldn't reach that were just too strong. The green color was too strong, so I just go over it with that, and I just kind of tone it down. And now with a brush, I use the same paint, and I just pick out the muscles, the bones, and just to tidy it up a bit and make it pop. Even paint the head dome as well. So now I use deep Kim flesh. This is when it starts to get more paler and brighter. Again, I'm just dry brushing this paint over the areas, focusing mainly on the areas that are more visible to the light. But my light source is coming from the top left of the screen. But you don't always have to follow that, to be honest, I feel. It's just whatever looks interesting. My favourite paint, Sigmar Burgundy. So I paint this into all the mouth, the gums, the ribs. And later on I'll be painting other parts of the model too. So just be careful and just try not to paint over the skin, but it will happen, and then you can just correct it. I chose red because I want it to be very like a stark contrast, because I was going to use like a flesh color before, but I thought the flesh color would be too subtle. So now I use Corex white to paint the hair, and I also use it to also add some highlights to the bones and the muscle as well. You can see here the red has gone over, it's spilled over, so I'm just correcting it now with that white just to make it sharper, and also the fingers too. I always forget these parts, I don't know why. They're very important. Back to Sigmar Burgundy. So now painting the guts and as I mentioned earlier, the ribs of the Mourngul and the guts of the horse. I don't know, this is quite satisfying too for me. I like when you use contrast paints and they just they flow into all the areas that they need to. It just makes it so much easier, and it just feels like it's very clean and sharp. I just love it. So now I'm using the burgundy. I've decided to use the burgundy for the lower area. I was going, because in the artwork it's like a darker green, the gradient, But I decided I want a nice, it's, you know, it's already got cold colors already, the blue base and the green kind of skin, or the white skin, the pale skin. So I thought, oh, red would be a nice contrasting color to add a bit of visual interest. So I went with, you know, like his guts are hanging out. So what I'm doing, I put it on thick underneath. But what you see, as I start going on the outside of the flaps of the skin, it's a little thick, but there's much less than it was before. And then what I do, I start to thin it, and then I start to pull my brush up, and then I put it down again. And then what I do, I also wash off the paint on my brush, and then I kind of pull it down. See, I'm pulling it up now, not going too far up. And in a bit I will thin my brush, thin the paints, and then I'll just pull it down to feather it, or even feather it as well, so it doesn't, so there's a nice transition to the white pale flesh. It takes a few coats, you gotta wait for it to dry first, and then you go back to it and just build it up, and then you can make the paint really thick around the bottom areas. I also use it to, like, it's thinned down as well, and I paint that over all the spine and like the ribs and maybe under the armpits too, on the cheeks, just some areas where there might be some blood, but of course there's not really any blood in this thing. It's like a ghost, dead thing. Actually, I'm not really sure what it is. It looks like a ghost, but then it has some features that make it look like it's a zombie. So I think you can have fun with it. I guess it doesn't have to always make sense. It doesn't have to follow the law specifically. But that's my one. It's like a floating zombie ghost, and it's just wild and bloody and hunting around. Dark flesh. I use this over the horse, so I made sure I dry brushed the horse also earlier when I was doing the flesh of the Mourngul. So this is kind of like a slap chop technique. Then I use some Steel Legion drab and just paint that over the horse. I kind of have one motion of the brush, just back and forth, up and down, vertical. And I just keep doing that for the legs and the front legs. I'm always going down. I was originally gonna do fur, like spend time bit by bit, but then I just thought it's not worth it. I want to get it on the table and look presentable. I also use white on the skulls as well. Forgot to add that earlier. That happens with these kind of models. You know, we paint them, and then I missed this part, and then you got to go back again. Screaming skull now. I use these just for the teeth. Keep it simple. I don't want them to be similar to the white color that I've used previously. So that's why I went for this type of warmer ivory type of colour, just to add a bit of interest, and it looks a bit more realistic, and yeah, that's the main reason. I added some a red shade now. I added red shade into the guts of the horse, and I also added red shade onto the bottom of the Mourngul and on the spine. The shade is called Berserker Blood Shade. Screaming Bell. So I bought this paint recently for the Skaven paint job, and I just really love it, so I'm using it more often now for painting these kind of things. Troll Slayer Orange. Not sure why I did this, but I just wanted to add a bit of colour to the eyes. I was thinking to go bright red, but then I thought, just try orange. Hashut Copper. I pick out all the details, and then I also kind of do a dry brush over the metal fence as well. So it looks like scratches, or it's just old and banged up, wear and tear. Oh, and I've also added Agrex's Earthshade to this part already. I forgot to mention that. So now I'm using the Baharoth Blue, or is it? Yeah, Baharoth Blue. You can even use Gauze Blaster as well. That's quite nice. And you just fill them down with lots of water, and basically just stick it on where you want it to. Then you wash the brush a bit, and then you can start moving it around. I found it better than Nylox Oxide. That stuff gets thin very easily, or it's just too thick. I find it very hard to work with. I also chose this bright blue as well because I wanted a bit more variation to the base as well, and I thought this will make some kind of like popping effect, because I don't want to add any OSL to this model like I usually do for my ghosts. I want the focus point to be this big monster in the middle, and so the base is darker on purpose. I use matte varnish to go over the whole model now, especially the base, because the shades, they made it a bit glossy, and I wanted to tone that down a bit. Added some grass tufts as well, just to spice it up a bit. Not too many, just enough, otherwise it would just be a green base then. And I chose a kind of dead looking grass colour as my base. And now I'm using snow again. I love snow, especially recently. And it just helps break up the base, adds a bit of interest to it. You can tell a story. Like when I put snow on bases, I like to put it on top of statues or rocks, so it looks like it's been falling, and it adds a sense of realism to it. I also kind of flick it onto the brushes, like I kind of dry brush over it, and that's quite a cool effect too. And when it gets thin, I just kind of dry brush, I guess, and I move the paint, the texture paint over the rocks too, so it's not too heavy, but it catches it, so it's like frost. And here we are. This is the Mourngul, also known as Krondispine. So I really enjoyed this project, and I was very excited to make a video on it, and because I've recently got into Nighthaunt, and I just can't wait to try it out and get it on the table. I had one game and it was amazing, so I definitely want to probably make some videos of Nighthaunt 2 in the future. So I hope this video was interesting and useful. Please let me know in the comments what you felt. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more. And give me a like. That will really help me so much. And it lets me know I'm doing something right. So, happy painting everyone. See you next time. Bye.